Hey everyone, I'm Clue, and if you couldn't guess it, today we're going to be talking about bright lights, but I actually want to split this into 4 different parts because there are, well, 4 different things that I personally would like to talk about. So starting off, obviously today, we're going to go over bright lights. I'm just going to give a overall review of the set from my perspective and my own feelings and thoughts towards the set as I've been enjoying it. And then I want to talk about the whole release cycle. So not just bright lights, but also around the table, which if you haven't seen, I've done several videos on why I am personally disappointed with that product, but then we also need to talk about these new social play kits and just the competitive scene, if you will, as it is growing from the changes brought about during this release cycle. And then I do want to talk about the current state of design when it comes to Flesh and Blood, what we're seeing in cards and what we're probably going to see going forward. And then lastly, we'll end off the week with, a bit of fun. We'll talk about what I personally would like to see in the future, and then, with heavy hitters being announced, I'll make some guesses at what we might actually see going forward. Right then, bright lights. I think personally, the best way for me to sum it up pretty clearly is to say it like this. Bright lights is the first set where I don't actively want to open every single box I have, right? So when it comes to the majority of other sets, in fact, all the other sets, thinking about it, I would be more than happy to just go and tear through my entire collection and open every single box. I would find that enjoyable. When it comes to bright lights, unfortunately, I personally don't. Now, that is not to say it isn't a good set, nor that it does have that desire amongst some of the community. But to me, bright lights is one-dimensional, so it is very clear that there are going to be people who feel like me, who open a few and then they're done with the product because there isn't really anything left there for them. If there's some singles we want, well, we'll go pick them up, but we're not going to actively sift through bright lights and the monotony of the bulk of Flesh and Blood at this current point in time. Versus people who do obviously really love and enjoy Mechanologist and probably tear it open any chance they get so that they can either play with it, experience it, or just hunt down some of the great mech cards. But again, that is not my personal favorite class. So again, to me, bright lights isn't going to be my personal favorite set. But again, that's not to say it is a bad set, right? What it does well. It's just what it does isn't vastly applicable to everyone in the community. And that's fine. Going forward, this is what we're going to see, right? We're going to either see class combos or these one-dimensional sets where they solely focus on a specific class and a specific design that will appeal to some, but not to everyone. And that is, again, completely fine, because the big takeaway from bright lights is that this is made to be played with. This is not made to be opened and collect, right? Put plain and simple, Flesh and Blood is losing its TCG status to me, right? By way of boxes. Yes, it is still a collectible card game, but your avenue for opening, your avenue for hunting, your avenue for chasing is not the roulette that most card games suffer from. Yes, it is there, but it is very much presented openly that if you want the collectible cards, your best bet is not to roll the dice, try to get lucky. Go to the secondary market, support the community, be part of the community, and that is fantastic by way of Legend Story Studios, right? They're not completely transparent, right, yet. Who knows going down the line, but it is very clearly shaped that Bright Lights is a product to be played with by way of the new limited changes, as well as obviously Crack Shuffle Play, and overall the rarity shakeup. If the expansion slot was vastly more accessible than it is, right, that wouldn't be the case. But these odds alone, you will not get the expansion slot cards you want opening boxes. You can open a mountain of boxes and your chances are very slim. So whether or not they are saying it, anyone who looks at the odds, looks at the numbers, can clearly see that to collect this product, to collect this set, you are significantly more so than it has ever been. Go to the secondary card market and buy the cards you want. And that's fine, right? Again, I personally want to see them really buckle down and make sets just catering towards the playable. They have their whole philosophy driven towards the secondary card market, and yes, there are some stuff to fine-tune and figure out in that sense, but to have the sets clearly marked as you are meant to enjoy this as the card game, not just sift through boxes looking for cards, is fantastic to me. Now, whether or not this is what they intended to get to at the start, probably not, given the first edition unlimited model, but right, Cold Fours alone sign that this is the direction we're heading, right? Cold foils, if you look at any articles prior to Fab 2.0 and their place in the game, they were the big collectible aspect, right? Chances are anyone new in the community, anyone's joined in the past year or is going to join in the next few years, will look at cold foils and pretty much wonder what makes them special, right? Because the majority of cards aren't really collectible. They're collectible by way of, I guess, scarcity to some extent. But then again, a lot of people don't actually want them, so the scarcity is well balanced. But in terms of value, right? Cold foils don't really have anything there anymore. And who knows in the future? But for now, right? Flesh and Blood is losing its big collectible element. And yes, it's trying to fill that hole with these other cards, with Marvels, with the big other chase elements, but they're not really capturing that essence that was in the first few sets in terms of cold foils and their place in the game. And again, it's bittersweet because I like to collect cold foils. There's lots of people who like to collect cold foils, right? We can now pretty much grab every single cold foil from a set in less than a case, right? Basically, because the majority of cold foils are, $1 to $2 cards. But on the other side of that, right, we don't really want them to be $1 to $2 cards because they are meant to be the pinnacle of our pride when it comes to our collection. And to put frankly, right, the amount that pinnacle is worth definitely translates to the amount of pride people generally have towards that collection, right? If something is worth more, a lot more people are going to be vastly happier in showing it off. Again, though, that is my personal feeling towards the current state of Flesh and Blood's collectability, and we'll probably, in a week or so go over it a bit more. But overall, again, the direction that Bright Lights is taking the game, I am completely on board with, right? I think the game should really emphasize its playability over its collectability because, as we've seen, right, everything in the community is gearing up for collectability. We had a huge amount of collectability in the early days, sure, we still do, but the amount of growth seen in the competitive side, in the playing side, in even the casual side now, vastly outweighs that of Flesh and Blood's collectability. So, again, from a company perspective, they should really be leaning into their strength. The strength at the moment is playing, not collecting. That said, what about the actual core of the set? Well, personally, Bright Lights has kind of done its job. I have enjoyed opening this set and playing with it vastly more than I thought I would have going into it. Again, I had no interest in mech, yet after Bright Lights, I have actively picked up and learned how to play Mechanologist, something I personally thought I'd never do because, again, the playstyle and the aesthetics just wasn't something that I generally lean towards when it comes to, well, fantasy. But in saying that, right, there are definitely things that are done well in terms of the new card support, the new mechanics, but then there are also some things that are not done well, right? I think overall the Evo system has not been implemented to the best it could have, and it sort of runs adjacent to what Mechanologist wants to do and wants to be, versus being an extension of their sort of itemization and desire to play all these fancy cool gadgets. And there are, vastly easy ways that this could have been more applicable. It is very clear that the level of the Evos was built around Tekla-Vossen. They can't be too strong because then Tekla-Vossen would be too strong, but at the same time because none of the other heroes have the mechanics that Tekla-Vossen does to make playing Evos significantly easier, especially in terms of the main Mechanologist mechanic, which is boost. They sort of fall short. Now, obviously, if their power level was increased, again, Tekla-Vossen would be too strong, but they'd probably see it more play than what they will see in all the other Mechanologist heroes. Yet, at the same time, if they were sort of more accessible, right, rather than needing Tekla-Vossen, right, if they had Crank in themselves, or there was more ways to give them Crank, or different ways to actually make them part of your natural play loop, even in the way of Dash, right? If her ability affected Evos, you could put Evos into play, right? Even with a big change to her current mechanic, 0 to 1, right? That limits the scope of Evos that you can actually play. You still have to pay 1 extra, right? But it would still make them more accessible. Max, obviously, you want to play the Breaker set, but at the same time, you don't, right? Because using your hyperdrivers for that sort of detracts from everything Max wants to do. You want hyperdrivers to actually gain resources and boost. So you're sort of going 2 steps forward, 1 step back if you try to lean into the Evo. Same with sort of Hyperdriver X. There are so many different avenues for you to spend your hyperdrivers that they all compete with one another rather than synergize. So personally, I think if the Evos were an actual extension to the item system, it would have been a lot better. But that is not to say it isn't a great mechanic. However, with the introduction of such a new and hefty mechanic, we of course get to the rule reprise, which I think is definitely a new choke point for new players, right? If we see this level of design, this scope of addition to the rules so quickly, right? If every single new one-dimensional class set comes out and we see this new level of interaction, this new volume of cards hit play, then this just further increases the learning curve, which is already quite high for new players. The biggest issue that I have sort of come across when it comes to new players is the idea that the majority of the community has grown with the game, right? But at the same time, the game has gone to the level of complexity and the level of knowledge that a new person coming in is vastly overwhelmed by what is actually on offer, right? Once you strip all that away and you get back to the basics, yeah, that's a great starting point. But there isn't really anything that teaches the basics. Even the blitz decks in themselves, I wouldn't say do a fantastic job at that, because they are sort of a unpiloted deck, right? You give it to a player, but they still have to learn what to do. And no offense to Flesh and Blood, yes, they have been working towards it. Yes, they've redone it. The learn page is not instructive enough, is not intuitive enough. And the simplest thing to do for a company that wants to play in the flesh, wants to strip away all of the online accessibility to some degree, right? Again, we're in the 21st century. Online will always play a part. But in terms of learning, put a rule book. There's so many products. I mean, the Classic Battle, that's the only one that actually has a rule book, right? None of the blitz decks have like a little rule book or just a quick start card that tells you what you're trying to do, the aim of the game, right? The majority of them just have go to the learn page, and that in itself, if we're going to see the advancements in sets as we have to the same degree as Bright Lights, right, where we get this mountain of rule reprises and these changes that you have to think about, then the onboarding mechanism needs to be more than just products, right? Yes, it is a great thing to sort of encourage people to reach out to other people and learn from the community, but come on, that's a little daunting. And again, people aren't, carbon copies of one another. Well, to some degree they are, but in terms of applicability, yes, sure, the majority of people are wonderful in the community. Yes, they will take the time to teach and help you develop your skills, but that's not going to be the case everywhere. And again, from a company perspective, there are lots of ways for them to sort of raise up and make the learning curve surprisingly easier. And then, of course, the other sort of big thing to talk about when it comes to the set is probably going to be the expansion slot, right? Now, personally, I think this is the worst iteration, right? I know we only have two, but that's sort of saying something when they don't build upon what they attempted, right? So the quote-unquote expansion slot of Dusk Till Dawn wasn't just Majestics, was a ton more cards and more accessible, right? Overall, the two token system that we have in Bright Lights, is that necessary, right? There are two mentalities why it had to happen. One, the packs were cut down from 6 to 4, so obviously you need more tokens to accommodate the missing 2. But at the same time, what do you actually need tokens of when it comes to Bright Lights? Hyperdrivers, sure. Armor pieces, there's 4. Heroes, there's 3, right? We don't even have the adult versions, and then 3 weapons as well. And they've also, swapped it so that X hero has X weapon, so there's no contention, right? Usually if you have all 3 heroes, well then you'll have obviously the weapon, and it won't impede on use of heroes. So that's 3 tokens by way of that, right? Then you need the 4 armor, so that's 7, and altogether we're 8. Now you have to try and get all those tokens, right? It is finely balanced, but at the same time, with the amount of stuff you get in the set, right? And then also you've got the community idea, everyone swapping tokens and all that. I think the expansion slot could have been fine-tuned a little bit better, right? I mean, I would have personally just pushed it to 17 at this point. So you still have the 2 token slots, the guaranteed 2 token slots. You go ahead and you stick the adult heroes back there, because that's a big grievance that a lot of us have with the set, right? And then you make the expansion slot consistent. You tie back in rares and other cards like in Dusk Till Dawn, and again, it feels like something of actual value rather than this really weird chase. Because again, 1 in 15, you're getting 1 to 2 expansion slot cards, right? Your chance of getting repeats is substantial. There is really no incentive to hunt down these cards from opening boxes. Unless, again, you're opening boxes en masse. So why, again, if we're shifting towards playability over collectability, why put these hurdles in place, right? Now, of course, I understand the rationale behind wanting something actually valuable and collectible. But then again, we have the simple fact that one of the dedicated spots of the expansion slot is a playable card, right? So if it's playable and meant for play, it should be more accessible, right? We could leave the Rainbow Foil variants as the collectible and the valuable version of these cards and make the rest significantly more accessible, as they rightfully should be if, again, they're meant to be playable or key reprints, things that are vital towards the play state of the game. Now, personally, again, I've said a few times, I think that the overall set should be cut down and the expansion slot should be lifted up, right? 250 cards for mech, sure. For any other hero, it's a little bit overkill at this stage and sort of makes the gap wider as they cycle around through all the heroes, because that's going to be a big thing, is if they stick with the current rate, right? 1, 3, 1, or whatever they do, or 1, 3, 4, or whatever they do, it still takes a year, 2 years to cycle through heroes. In fact, I think it's longer than that, actually, thinking if you do both Classic Constructed and potentially even Blitz, give adult versions of the heroes, right? So it's going to amount to a design issue eventually, that it would be significantly better to do shorter sets and quicker releases. But we'll touch on that more when we get to the next video, the release cycles. Overall, Bright Lights is a good set, right? It is a good benchmark for things going forward. And if they build upon it, tweak it, and to some degree fix it from my perspective, then this is a fantastic blueprint going forward. Again, I personally would like to see them emphasize playability vastly more, right? To some degree, we might eventually need, again, a return to a 2-product model where we have the playable boxes and the collectible boxes, right? So that everyone can be appeased and so that we can actually raise back up the collectability of Flesh and Blood. Because at the end of the day, that is also going to be the lifeblood, right? You can only get so far with competition and prize support and all that if you want, obviously, an influx of money, well, then there has to be something worth that money within the sets. And again, we are dropping and dropping and dropping. But again, overall, I am blown away with Bright Lights, right? From my personal perspective on everything I thought about the set going into it. This is a great set, and it shows you what they can do when they can solely focus on something. Is it perfect? No. But it is a great level of design, and it, in all honesty, makes me excited to see any class get this treatment, right? No matter what class they pick, whether it's my personal favorite or not, having a set like this, if built to this degree and this level, towards any class or any hero, will make me excited about that class. So, is Bright Lights worth buying? Well, personally, I would highly incentivize, if you are, even if you're collecting, buy at least a case, right? I know that's a pretty hefty ask. Fine, don't buy a case. Buy a box, right? But at most, buy a case. Because within a case, you are going to get the majority of your playsets for the lesser rarities done, right? And then you can swap and you can find just the cards you want off the secondary market. But overall, it is still something worth opening and experiencing, whether or not you are a fan of Mechanologist. Will you find all the cards you want? No. Will you find any specific cards you're looking for? Well, probably no. Will you complete your cold foils? No. Right? Again, look at this. Cold foil, cold foil, cold foil, cold foil, cold foil. Right? Even excluding the Marvels. And then the majority of these being worthless, because again, the Evo design, which we'll touch on more. But, right, it is still a fun product. Play, crack, shuffle, play. Use that as a starting point even for a deck. Learn how to draft, learn how to build decks, right? I think this is probably the best set to do it with, right? Just mix up a bunch of cards, have a few, and start to understand why cards work in the way they do. Compared to other sets, because this does have a sole focus, it is that one class dynamic, there is a lot less information for you to actually sift through to understand, rather than having to digest, up to 4 different classes, their playstyles, and why X card works for them, right? We now have 3 variations of the one class that generally likes to run the same sort of playstyle by way of mainly boost. But now you can sort of understand why this hero ability affects that playstyle in X way, and you can translate that to other heroes as well, right? You can look at all the different ninjas and see, why X ninja operates slightly differently to the other ninjas. Overall, Bright Lights is a wonderful step forward, and in its own ways, it's sort of groundbreaking for LSS because it is a new design, a new idea that they can solely focus on and make their own compared to most other TCGs and obviously the format and delivery of their products. So I am hoping, that we continue down this pathway, and it seems like we are going to cycle through this idea of class combos and then back to Bright Lights, and it's one class dynamic. So I am looking forward to, what the future sets do bring and the lineup of products we do actually eventually get. Overall, would I recommend Bright Lights? Yes, I personally think this is probably the best starting point compared to what other products we do actually have on offer. I think grabbing a box of Bright Lights, playing limited with it, or even just, again, going through the packs and using that one class dynamic to learn how to actually properly build a deck is a fantastic idea. This is definitely the box to play with.